Hi all, my name is Chrissy Thompson. I'm a solutions engineer with Salesforce.org, and today we're going to be meeting with Allison Spector. She works with Right Around Portland, and we're going to walk through how you can create a button to clone your campaigns along with the child donations, which could include grants, in-kind, doesn't matter. Whatever those donations are, we can clone those into this year's campaign. So all with a simple click of a button, we're going to recycle a lot of data, reduce that manual entry, and just make it more efficient for your team. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet Allison.
I'm Allison Spector. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the development director at Right Around Portland. And we are an organization that runs a creative writing and publishing program in social service agencies. So we use our model of writing in community to help support mental health and well-being, to help folks who are experiencing isolation be able to connect with other folks, and to amplify voices and stories that are not typically heard in our community. So really excited to be here today, and we like working with Salesforce. We actually use it across our organization. So we use it for our workshop enrollments, all of our fundraising, volunteer management. So we use it across the board. Yeah, so one thing we were noticing was that year after year, we have, as part of our fundraising, we have all of our campaigns that have the contacts, and I guess I'll focus in sort of on our grants program. So essentially every year we were re-entering in the data year after year for each of our grant opportunities, as well as for our individual campaigns. And just that duplication of stuff was causing a lot of time. So Chrissy helped support us in cloning those opportunities so that each year we just go in and we can clone those opportunities from 2020 to 2021, and they get marked as a cultivation opportunity for us. And that way we can run reports on cultivations, we can add new ones to that, but it helps us just to move people along year over year. You know, it's definitely saved us time, and it just is the way that it's set up is that it actually pulls over the certain fields that we wanted to have. So for instance, for our grants, we can pull over the focus area, as much information as we've entered in that we want to translate over year, that can all, you can select those fields. So it saved us just a ton of time of having to manually go in and re-enter information, being able to have information populate year over year that we can carry forward and continue to add notes into. Yeah, so I don't know exactly how much time, but it's definitely a time saver, and I think just like a headache saver of like, oh, I gotta do this thing that feels tedious. So I think just that too has been really supportive. I think sometimes, and I feel like Chrissy, you were good with this, of thinking about like, what are the things that I would love to be able to do, and finding support within the Salesforce organization to say, hey, is this possible for us to be able to do this? Because I think sometimes we have those hangups of like, oh, I want to be able to do this, but I don't know if I can. And so even just asking those questions and reaching out to the Salesforce team to see if that's possible is helpful.
That is a very good point, because actually you reached out to your network, who then reached out to myself. And I don't know if a lot of nonprofits realize that we do pro bono work. And so that was how you and I got connected, and then we were able to build out your platform to the level that you guys needed it. So that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. So for other nonprofits out there, if you need help, there is an ecosystem that is able to jump in. All right, let's see this flow in action. I will show you how it works, and then I will walk through how we created this flow. As you can see here, I have our last year's fall campaign, and we can see that we have 4 opportunities or donations that live within this campaign. And so with one click of a button, I am able to clone the campaign, move the data, and update the data so it represents this year, as well as move over all of the donations or grants that we received. Keep in mind that as I'm walking through this same workflow could be used for any master-child object relationships. So if you have an event and you have registrations underneath that event, and you want to clone those registrations of those who have attended and maybe start a new campaign with that, or you're working in the program service delivery and you have individuals who receive those programs, and the same idea, you want to take those individuals and enroll them into another program using a simple button. So let's walk through that. I'm going to go ahead and click this button, and there are some values that the team wants the individuals to actually type in. So I'm going to say fall campaign 2020, the start and end date. So these could vary between year and year, year to year. And then once I hit next, the flow is going to fire off, create the new campaign, and it'll move over all of the associated donations into the new campaign. So here is our new campaign. All of the data that came over from the original campaign lives here, as well as the opportunities or donations. You will see that one of those donations did not come over, and that's because the workflow says only donations that we received or only grants that we won. All right, let's dive in on how we actually built this leveraging flows. Go ahead and select the gear on the top right for setup. And then on the left panel, type in flow, create new flow. And I'm going to use the screen flow because we are asking users to put in information. I'm going to provide you a little lay of the land of flows. There's two tabs. The first tab is the Elements tab. Think of the actions you are going to either have the user do or the flow is going to process, such as creating a record. And then on the manager side, as we are creating resources, think of resources as values or records that we're going to be using throughout this flow. As we're creating these resources, this is where those items will live. So back on our Elements screen, let's go ahead and drag over the screen. And this represents that first page that the users are going to see, asking them for the new campaign name as well as start and end date. You will name the screen name, so I have that here, and then that will default the API value. From here, we want to add the fields that the user is going to see. So the first item that we're going to ask the user to put in is the new campaign name. So go ahead and drag the text over. I'm going to label this field, and so the label represents what the user is going to see. As you click out of that, that represents what the API value. The next item that we need is the start and end date. And so now that I've dragged over all the fields that we need, we're going to go ahead and hit done. And then you're going to connect the start to our first screen. At this point, go ahead and hit save and then label this flow. The next step, what we're going to do is we're actually going to get information from that original campaign that fired off this process. So go ahead and drag over get record. And I'm going to label this find original campaign ID. Now, which object are we going to find? So we're going to look for the campaign object. And how we determine which campaign that lives in Salesforce is it's going to match the ID of the record that started this process. So go ahead and type ID. So the campaign ID matches the record that started this process. To hold this value, we're going to create our first resource. So go ahead and select new resource. And this right here is going to be a variable, which means that this value can change. So if I'm on one campaign and I push the button, that's going to be the campaign ID. If I switch and go to another record, that's going to be the campaign ID. So I'm going to go ahead and select variable var campaign ID. You truly can name this whatever you want, as long as you know what to reference when you need this later. And this actually is going to be a text value. I don't need any additional information on this. It's just the value that is provided. And I'm going to say that this is available for input and output. Now that we have set the requirements, how are we going to store the campaign that we found? So I'm going to say only the first record that we find, because there really is only one campaign, because IDs are unique identifiers. And what I'm also going to do is we could store automatically all the fields that live within that campaign. But for this use case, I actually only need a few values, such as the type of campaign and the record type. So once we find this campaign, we're going to go ahead and drop that information in here. And then I'm going to hit done and connect that screen. How do we take that campaign ID that lives on the record and push that into the flow? So I'm actually going to leave flows for a second and show you how you can create that button. On the campaign object, go ahead and select buttons and links on the left panel. On the right side, go ahead and select new button or link. And what you're going to do is label the button whatever you want. I have used copy campaign and donations. And then we need to decide where is this going to live. Because this button lives on the actual record itself, I'm going to go ahead and flag that it is a detailed page button. And we're going to keep this as a URL, and we're going to display in a new window. To get that URL, Go ahead and go back to your flow and hit the back button. You'll find the flow that you have created, and on the right side, go ahead and select View Details and Versions. Copy the URL listed in your flow, and then you'll paste that value here. I'm going to open my flow again because we need some values that we have added. Within that flow, we're going to reference that new variable or that resource that we created. So here is that var campaign. So I'm actually going to open this up, and I'm going to copy this value. So this is the API name that we're going to need, and we're going to go ahead and copy that, and we're going to put a question mark after the flow and paste the var campaign ID. And we're going to say that it equals, open this option. So this is on the campaign record. These are all the fields that live within the campaign, and we need it to be the campaign ID. So this flow is basically going to store the variable campaign ID that we just set up as the campaign ID that lives on the record. Go ahead and hit save, and then what you'll want to do is make sure you add this button to your page layout. And the reason that I wanted to take a moment and step back and do the button is I wanted to connect the dots of why we created this variable campaign. That button is going to pass this value, and as long as whatever campaign ID that lives in Salesforce matches that value that is passed through the flow, we're going to store these for the future use. All right, so now that we know which campaign we're using, I'm going to open back up to my Elements tab, and I'm going to actually create this new campaign. And the reason we want to create the campaign first is because once we create those new donations, we need to associate it to the new campaign. I have labeled mine as clone new campaign. We're only creating one record, so I'm going to leave that as is. And then we're actually going to use a variation of values to create this. So we're going to take over what we have gathered from last year's campaign as well as put in new values. So I'm going to go ahead and look for the object that we're creating. The left side represents the fields that we need to add values to for this new record, and the right side actually represents the values we'll place in those fields. So to create a campaign, and if you're not sure which fields you actually need, go ahead and manually create a campaign within your Salesforce instance, and it'll show you need your record type, you need the campaign name, you need the start and end date, whatever those requirements that your organization has put in place. So as an example, the campaign name, I'm going to go ahead and look for name, that's the field. And then I'm going to type in name, because remember that first screen we're asking our users to enter their new campaign name? That's going to be the value for the new campaign. Another value that we need to pull over is the record type. So I'm actually going to type in record type ID. And because the user didn't enter that in the initial screen, we're going to reference the campaign that we found in the initial step. I'm going to reference the campaign from the find original campaign flow that we put in. And I'm going to type in record type. And so the record type for the new campaign is exactly the same as the original campaign. And so you'll just continue adding the fields that are required for your organization and then hit done. Go ahead and connect those dots. And I'm going to drag this off to the side because this is kind of a side item that we need. The next thing that we need to do is we need to get our donation records. I'm going to go ahead and drag over get records. It's very much like the campaign process. I'm going to label this as find donations. And then what object are we looking for? So in their instance, it's called an opportunity. Otherwise, it would be called a donation. Okay, now which opportunities do we actually need, or which donations? So now we can put in matching criteria. So the campaign ID has to equal the campaign that started this process. So I'm going to say that the campaign ID matches the variable that we're passing from the button. And not only that, I want to only know the donations that are considered one. So I'm going to go ahead and type in is one. And the reason I'm not using the stage value is because if you have different record types, you could have different field values that represent one. So as long as it's considered is one, we are going to count it. We don't really care what the stage labeling convention is. And so I'm going to go ahead and leverage global values that the flow will offer, and I'm going to go ahead and say is true. So global constant is true. And then how are we going to store the records that we find? So we're actually going to assign them to a variable. This is where we're going to store all of these donations that we find. And I'm going to label this as collection all donations. And basically by saying it's a collection, that means there's multiple records, and I'm going to say it's a record, and we are allowing multiple records to come into this collection, so we're going to go ahead and flag that box. The specific object are opportunities or donations, and then we are flagging that they're available for input and output. And so now all of the records that come through, we're going to store them in this old donations collection. And then what I also want to do is assign specific values. So I'm going to go ahead and put the amount, the account ID. Record type is going to be one that you'll want to include, especially leveraging NPSP. You're going to have donations, major gifts, those types of things. So that way, whatever type of donation that was originally, we can carry that over. And then any custom fields that you may have implemented in your build. Once you are all done, go ahead and select done, and we are ready to go. Now that we set the requirements for what donations we are looking for, campaign matches, as well as it's a closed one, what we need to do is then run that through a loop. So once we find one donation, we need to send it back to find the next donation. I'm going to drag over loop. I'm going to label this as loop through donations. And then which donations are we going to loop through? So it's asking which collection variable. So it's the one we just created. So collection of old donations, and we're going to go first to last and hit done. And then you'll connect the find donations to the loop. I'm going to pull this up a little bit more so we can see. The next step is, as a donation comes through this loop, we want to set the assignments for what those new values are going to be on the new donation. So I'm going to label this new donation values. And then we also need to create a new variable. As we are setting each of these values, this variable is going to hold what those values are. So go ahead and select the box and type in new resource. And I'm going to flag this as a variable. I'm going to label this as new donation. And this will be a record, and it's only going to be a single record. And the reason is each time we run through the loop, we are going to create a new donation record. So one single record. We'll go ahead and add donations. Go ahead and find opportunities or donations depending on your org, and flag available for input and output. And hit done. Now that that variable is set for us, we have a place to put those values. So go ahead and type in new donation. That's going to help us find that variable we just set. And then we need to start being more specific about the fields that we need to pull. So an example would be we need the amount. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this caret and it'll dive in further. So we need the amount of the donation. And the amount of the new donation represents what we found in the first loop. So we'll go ahead and type in loop. And so we can see current item from the loop. Go ahead and open that caret and then select amount. Again, so this represents the new field that we need to put values in, and this is the actual value that you're going to put through. Let's do one more. Let's do record type. So again, you type in new because that is the name that we gave for the new variable that's holding this, and then open this up. And I'm going to type in record type equals the current loop's record type that it found. And a lot of times I actually just type in the fields that I'm looking for, and it reduces the options that I have. You're going to see here when I typed in record type, there's one with a caret and one that just is basically the ID. Because I don't need any more information specific to this record type, I don't need to click into that caret. I just need the ID. So we'll go ahead and drop that. And the other item that I want to show you is the close date. So the close date actually does not equal what we pulled through the loop. We need a new value. And so what I'm going to do is come in here, and of course you can default this. Let's say you're running a specific campaign and you're expecting to receive these by the end of the month. You could just go ahead and default what that value would be. I'm going to create a new resource, which is going to be a formula to help us figure out what that date is. Go ahead and drop that down. So this resource is going to be a formula, new close date, and it's going to be a date. And then I want to reference the original close date that we found in that first loop. So go ahead and type in loop, continue on to that caret, and type in close date, and there's that value. So that's going to drop that in here. So it's saying what is the donation that we found, what is that close date, and then just like a basic math problem, we're going to add 365 and hit done. The last one that I'll do is the stage. And the reason I'm doing this is because all of the donations and all of these are going to be defaulted to their cultivation stage name. So you'll just continue adding the fields that are required for you to create a new donation. And then just make sure you validate what fields are required. Manually go ahead and create a donation, and it'll walk you through which fields your system actually needs you to include in this process. Once you have added all the fields that you need, go ahead and hit done. And then connect the loop to the assignment. For each item that it finds, it's going to set those assignment values. And then we need to add one more assignment. So I'm going to drag over the assignment, and I'm going to label this box up for delivery. Now that we have each of those individual records, we actually need to package them up and put them in another collection. So let's create this final collection. So go ahead and select new resource. I'm going to label this as collection create new donations crate, and I'll explain in a moment why I labeled it as a crate. It's a metaphor that helps me understand how this loop and this relationship process works. We are going to flag it as a record, and we are indicating that this does store multiple records, so it is a collection. And we'll go ahead and find our donations or opportunities and flag it's available for input and output. And then hit done. And just like the last assignment, what we're saying is this is what we want, and we're going to fill what we want with the values on the left. So what we want to do is change this value. This is important. Instead of it saying equals, we're going to add. We are going to add those new donations to this collection. So go ahead and type in here, and we'll type in new donation. And you're going to see it kind of assumes that we want a field value, and we really don't want a field value. So go ahead and delete this period and then click outside of the box and go ahead and hit done. And we're going to connect the box here. And then we're going to come back up to the loop. So now we've created our actual loop. We are going to get our donations as they come through this loop. The first donation that we find, we're going to assign new values referencing that donation we found. Once we've created that new donation, we're going to add it to a collection, and we come back and find the next donation, and we just repeat this cycle. Once we have run out of finding donations, we've found all of the old donations, this is where we can actually create our new donation. I'm going to label this as create new donations from crate. It is multiple donations, and now it just needs to know which collection are we going to use to create those. So go ahead and find that collection we created for the crate and hit done. And then connect that loop to that final creation. So you can see here, once we've gone through all of the loops and we cannot find any more donations, we'll drop down here and that is when we'll process the creation of the new donations. Lastly, what I recommend doing is dragging over a final screen. This will inform the users that the creation has been completed. So what I've done is I've dragged over the display text, drop that in here, and then added language that informs the user that the creation has been processed. And then go ahead and connect that final screen. Go ahead and save your flow, and then make sure you activate it. Another way to look at the flow that we just went through is, I like to think of it as packaging. So when you're creating a collection, think of boxes or records, and there's multiple boxes or records that are stored in a collection. So it's like a crate, and that is why I labeled it as a crate. And then anytime you create a variable, think of that as a single record. As we are gathering these old donations, this is a collection of old donations. We're going to run that through the loop. Each old donation that we find, we're going to process that over here, and we're going to create a new box or a new variable for the new donation. And we're going to set those values based on what we find in that current loop cycle. Once we have this new donation box ready to go, we're going to drop that down here, and we are going to create a new collection or a crate, which is creating new donations. So every donation that we're creating throughout this loop is dropped into this collection. Finally, when we run out of records, we're going to come through here, and we are going to create the new donations based on this collection or crate. And hopefully this metaphor of crates and boxes helps connect the dots on the difference between a variable and a collection. All right, thanks all. Have a great time building flows, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next session that we have. Take care. Bye.